right. Hey there. Good afternoon and welcome to this week's edition of Who's in the House with Michael. I have my very good friend and very distinguished guest, Dr. Kathleen Baldwin Mazza with me. Welcome to our show today.
Thank you.
So people say, why would you talk to your friends? Because some of my friends have some really cool backgrounds. And we come from one place and we land somewhere else. And I thought your journey would be fun to talk about today.
Thank you.
Right? So let's tell everybody where you're from.
Okay. I grew up in Brentwood. Grew up here in New York and now living in Setauket. So
Where were you born, though? Were you born?
I was born in Brooklyn. Isn't everybody?
I don't think I knew that.
I think everybody's born in Brooklyn.
Right. So how old were you when your family?
9 months.
Oh, you were right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I was actually they moved in on Halloween. Had all the trick-or-treaters knocking on the door as the boxes were coming in with a newborn.
What are your first memories as a child of growing up in Brentwood? What do you remember?
It wasn't a particularly affluent area, but it wasn't. But we had everything we needed.
Right.
And so I probably didn't realize how hard my parents were working. When I think about it now, and I look back at braces on my teeth and Catholic school, and my gosh, the number of bicycles under the Christmas tree, and all of these things, and I'm like, how did they do this?
Do you remember like going to the park or anything, or riding your bicycle?
I remember going to a lot of Little League games with my older brothers. Okay. The pretzel rods for a nickel.
Really? Yeah, that's right.
So I didn't usually mind going. But there was a big playground at the school, and the school was walkable from our house. My parents actually chose the house because my mom didn't drive. She grew up in Brooklyn, never learned to drive. Classic. And so we could walk to school and we could walk to church.
Okay.
Pretty much that everything else could be done when Dad was home.
Well, let's talk about siblings. Let's go through. Let's name all the siblings. So, oldest?
My oldest brother, Tom, was 4 years older than I was. We weren't in school a lot together. And then my brother George, a year younger. So he was in high school, a
you're
senior.
The second child.
I'm the third. So
George
Tom
came
and
right
George,
after Tom.
And George, my parents brought George home on their second wedding anniversary, their second baby. So, and then I was 3 years after that. And then my sister Tricia, 8 years after I was born. So she was, we always say she was raised by different people. Okay. She didn't have the same parents the first three.
I have that dynamic in my family too. Mom and Dad. Mom was a stay-at-home mom?
Stay-at-home mom.
And Dad, what did he do?
Dad worked in the building materials business. So he worked for, somebody who sold sheetrock to contractors who were building homes. And it was a big time of boom, the 60s, 70s in New York, in Long Island. If he were here, he would tell you he was involved in the construction of more than 10,000 homes.
But he would take longer to tell me that.
He would tell, and he'd probably tell you again tomorrow.
and Christopher's laughing his butt off right now. So, with your dad, with the dynamic in the household with Dad, was he warm and fuzzy and huggy and feely and kissy and all that? Was it like that?
I mean, listen, my dad is a mush. He was always more sentimental than my mom, honestly. I always said I never really saw my mom cry, but my father would cry at a Pepsi commercial. But he was the disciplinarian in the house, and he was. I perceived him as very stern as a child. What I came to figure out in adulthood is my father struggled with some anxiety, and he needed things to be a certain way for him to cope.
You just summed up my whole life. How come my family can't get this?
And so I just figured out that it wasn't that he was so difficult or strict. He just really couldn't handle it when things were not. If things were outside of his expectation, it really rattled him.
So growing up, what were your hobbies and interests?
Oh, I did a lot of the usual Girl Scouts and baton twirling and all that kind of stuff. I was never very athletic, and that has carried through into adulthood. We had friends on the block. It was, I'm still in touch with 80% of them. It's wild.
That is awesome.
That you just went and knocked on someone's door. That was what we did. You rode your bike and you found out who wasn't busy.
With your siblings, were you all, because Dad was so strict, were you all following the letter of the law to tiptoe around him? Did you all stay in the lane and make sure that, because I know you and I know your siblings.
Listen, my father would tell you raising me was like raising Shirley Temple.
Okay.
Because that was his line, that I was so easy to raise. And he just doesn't know the stories.
Who else was easy? Who's the next easiest in the family?
Oh, my brother George.
Sure.
Yeah. No, George truly was easier than I was. What we figured out pretty young was what Dad didn't know didn't hurt him. And it wasn't, we were not out there doing anything wild. But by the time I was old enough to go out at night, over 18 at the time was the drinking age, we might be going to a club. Al was, in the restaurant business, so we might not be going out till 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
My father couldn't handle that. So I would go to a friend's house at 7:30 or 8 o'clock. It didn't matter that I wasn't coming home till 1 or 2 o'clock, no matter what time I went out. But me leaving the house at 7 or 8 felt okay to him. Me leaving the house at 10, he didn't like that so much. So we just figured out how to make it easy for him.
Now, so Tommy, the oldest, the oldest usually has to break a lot of barriers. I'm the oldest.
He broke a lot of barriers.
What was Tommy like?
Tommy was always the wild child.
Was he pushing it, or was he just being himself?
Tom was a free spirit and, loved music from the day one. Got a Beatles album the day it came out. He was just always... if he had $2, he was off to buy a record of some sort. And, he carried that through in his life and became a DJ. So it was a very natural progression.
Is it fair to say he was less academically focused than you and George?
And ironically, he might have been the smartest, but he knew that what he wanted to do didn't need as much of that. He wanted... what I always say about Tom's personality is he wanted to be where people were celebrating. Yeah. And he wanted to be part of your happiest memories. So being a DJ was a very natural fit because generally if you're hiring a DJ, it's, not a funeral. It's a happy occasion. People are celebrating something, and he loved that kind of setting. So he did 2 years of college, a junior college, and graduated that.
Did he do that for himself or to appease your dad?
Oh, probably for my parents. It just, honestly, I don't ever remember questioning if I would go to college. It was just a matter of where, and I knew I wanted to go away. I wanted to have that whole experience of going away. Yeah.
Now, the youngest in the family usually has a different experience from everybody else. That's Tricia.
Yep.
Which her full name is?
Patricia Marie.
Yeah. Okay. So how was Tricia's world different growing up?
Well, my parents were pretty worn out, I think. And the other thing is when they had more time, more resources, more everything by the time she came along. Parenting. Yeah. And so she got away with more, we always said, but nobody's mad about it or anything, but it was funny to observe. And she got them to herself a lot. By the time she was 5 or 6, I was 13 or 14. I was out with friends. I wasn't interested in doing things. So she'd go out to dinner a lot. We went out to dinner as kids. It wasn't out of the realm of possibility, but it wasn't every weekend. It wasn't. So she was around adults more, where we were clustered as the kids, and all my parents' friends had kids around the same age that we were. We were going to Heckscher and barbecuing hamburgers and hot dogs, not generally going to restaurants because everybody had a bunch of kids and they needed shoes and braces and.
That's how it was.
Yeah, and these were all very hardworking, wonderful people, but very hardworking.
When do you think that you became academically focused or interested in education and just being good in school? Was that something you were always wired to do?
I always liked school. I did. So I knew I'd go to college.
But I think my question, you weren't disciplined into learning to like it. You always liked it.
Yeah, no, it's, I think, a natural curiosity.
Same for George?
Yes. Yeah. George, I think he always got A's. He was, to me, like he wasn't easy to follow, let's say.
You think subconsciously there may have been any of the rise up to that level, get his approval?
And listen, George was, he was a leader you want to follow. Like he never like made it difficult to follow in his footsteps. Teachers would comment about George. So,
Okay.
I remember some of that, but he was a great, when he was a senior in high school and I was a freshman, the senior lockers, that was kind of cool to be down at the senior lockers. He would allow me to put my stuff in his locker,
Sure.
little things that I always felt we were kind of in it together a little bit.
Yeah, that's good. I've teased you in the past. I have this image of you at school shining an apple and putting it on the teacher's desk all the time. I know you're getting the A, you're getting the gold star and all that. But again, I know that's how you're wired, and that's you enjoy that challenge. Did you know what you wanted to be when you were coming out of high school?
I really had. I had a guidance counselor at St. John High School, and I really didn't know. I was 16. I graduated at 17 because I was born late in the year. And so I wasn't steered toward anything. And she said to me, well, if you're not sure what you want to be, think about nursing. There was a nursing shortage at the time. She said, and of course it was Catholic school in the 1970s. So what were my options? Right. Teacher, nurse, nun, secretary, mom,
Literally, that's how it is.
And so she said, if you think about nursing, you can go into administration, you can go into sales, you can go in a clinical track and become a nurse practitioner. Was kind of an evolving thing at the time. So off I went to nursing school, kind of because somebody told me that's what I should do. And I was that kid,
Once you got into nursing school, did you immediately like it, or did it take it a little while to warm up to you to realize you were going to stick with it?
I liked nursing school. I did well in nursing school. I liked nursing school. I struggled with my first job in nursing. And it wasn't because I didn't like nursing. I often say nursing isn't what I do. Nursing is like who I am. I really love to be a caregiver. But my first job was a very challenging job, very meaningful work at Sloan Kettering in a medical oncology unit. And the struggle was that these patients needed so much care, and I was afraid I wasn't doing it well.
Right, or you can't help. You can only help so much.
You couldn't, and it's really hard to have job satisfaction if you don't think you're doing your job really well.
Right.
And that came over the first year or two, but of nursing, I figured it out, and then I was like, okay, I've got this. I can do this well, but I really struggled in the beginning.
How long did you do that job before you changed?
I did it about a year. I would have stayed longer, but my mom passed away unexpectedly. And
how old were you?
I was 23, 22. I was just a year out of college, 22. But I was engaged. I'd gotten engaged a couple of weeks before my mom passed away. And my sister was only 14 at home with my dad alone. My brothers were out of the house already. And knowing that I was probably going to change jobs when I got married a year later anyway, I kind of said to my dad, well, maybe I'll come back home, because I was living in Manhattan at the time. And boy, he really welcomed that. I didn't know what. So
that was the catalyst to change. It was geographical, but you ended up going from the cancer patient to
the ICU at North Shore University Hospital.
General ICU?
Yep, okay. Medical ICU. Yep, okay. Regular ICU.
All right, I'm going to come back to the family thing in a minute. I just want to follow this path. How long were you in medical ICU before the next change?
So then we got married, and a year later, it was time to buy the house. And that we couldn't afford to live by North Shore University Hospital, beautiful area. We moved out to Coram, and I worked at Stony Brook. And that's when I went to neonatal ICU.
So we had just met right after that. I didn't realize that it was... I was right on the cusp of that, to be honest with you, looking back now. I've known you 34 years.
So, yeah. Yep.
So, and I didn't realize it was just at that point in time that this has happened. Yeah. All right, let's rewind for a minute, and then we'll talk about the career. You met your husband when you were how old?
13.
Who has also been on the podcast to the audience. It's Al Mazza. You also met his dad, Al Sr., his siblings. We had the party and all that stuff. So that's where we are. So you met Al when you were 13.
Mr. Popper's Earth Science class.
What was it?
Mr. Popper's Earth Science class.
Okay. Was he a good student? Was he well behaved?
He did not meet his potential. How's that?
Was he well behaved?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, the teacher, Al was one of the students, I think the teachers liked him. Yeah. He was in honors classes at times, but some of them were, one said to him, why? Like, well, you don't want to do this. Why are you
Right.
torturing yourself?
Presuming if his interest wasn't high, he just was.
Yeah, it's and to be fair, the Mazzas hardworking kids. Really, like I'm saying, I met him at 13. He was 14. He was working 40 hours on a weekend in high school, and not being forced to by his parents. They were paying his tuition, and he had a house to live in and everything. But they were just really driven kids.
Well, they were working hard. All of the Mazza boys eventually ultimately worked in the same catering hall, and
Except for James.
so many more connections. It just goes on. And we don't have enough time for it today, but they had a good time while they were working hard,
Yeah,
too.
they had fun working. They brought their friends in to work with them, and it became their social life.
Yeah.
In addition, but they were getting... Yeah. They were making pretty good money for a bunch of teenagers.
There's still a lot of stories that keep coming out. You know, so they worked hard. People had wonderful, wonderful weddings, but trust me, they had a good time behind the scenes and after the fact, right?
Indeed.
When did you know that you and Al would be marrying each other?
I really thought he would be my high school sweetheart. I went off to college. I didn't think the relationship could survive that, or I wasn't sure it would survive that, but I knew I wanted to go away to college. That was always important to me, and I wanted that whole experience of dormitory living.
So you left
and all that.
not thinking that way.
So
not
I
knowing.
left, and we grew apart, grew together, grew apart, grew together. But there was always Al Mazza. Like he was just always there. When I come home for the summer, I'd be working catering, he'd be working catering. So we were off the same hours during the week. Let's go to the beach. It just happened kind of organically. And honestly, there was my roommate, when I worked at Sloan Kettering, I had an apartment in Manhattan that was subsidized by the hospital.
Okay.
I shared it with another nurse who, she worked 12-hour nights. I worked 12-hour days. And I often came out here when I was off. So we didn't spend a lot of time together in the apartment.
Right.
So it was a nice setup, actually. It was like having a subsidized apartment to myself. But one night we happened to be there together, and we went out and had a drink or two, and we were talking. And she was bemoaning the dating in Manhattan, what she was going through. And so I said, well, let's make a list of like, what are the minimum requirements for you? Like, who are you going to rule out right from the get-go? So it wasn't crazy, but she said, well, what's your list? And I said, well, he'd have to be smart. He doesn't have to be like, Ivy League educated, but somebody who you could have a conversation with. So he has to have a good work ethic. He has to have a sense of humor. I'd love him to love his family because that, is important to me. And she, had at this point had a couple of drinks, and she said, well, you're an idiot because you already got that guy. You don't even know it.
That's awesome.
And it was like the light switch. I was like, oh, I didn't realize I met him 10 years ago, but there he is.
That's pretty cool. Where'd you go to school?
Binghamton University.
Okay. So yeah, there was a little bit of a commute there. Mm-hmm. All right. So now once the light bulb goes off, you're working at Sloan Kettering. When did the relationship advance?
This was in the winter. By March, we were engaged.
Did you manipulate that, or did he just...
No, I think I probably said something to my friend Barbara, who wound up being in the wedding party. And she might have dropped a clue.
Okay. Wow.
But I think Al was just kind of waiting for the timing to be right, I think, at that point, and it was. So
there's a story that we told in one of Al's shots on TV, on the camera, of your dad being strict. And so there were times that you might have come home for the weekend and maybe didn't really let anybody know you were home, right?
It happened.
If we recall, the boys had a house that they were living in unattended with any adults. And you might have had to be in that house, and then you had to lay low and stay undercover for the weekend, right? You couldn't go out around town. Everybody knew who you were.
That's it. We grew up in the same town, not in the same neighborhood per se, different elementary schools, different junior highs, and we went to the same high school, but it was Catholic high school.
Okay.
So we weren't in school in town. But yeah, there was enough cross coverage that if I didn't want my parents to know I was home, I couldn't really, I'd have to go into Massapequa to go out.
I am sure when you came home from school, your dad's rules were still enforced.
Oh, 100%. Listen, I was 19 years old, and I had some friends over, and we got a quarter keg And my father had a heart attack. He was like, "Who told you you could get a keg of beer?" And and I was legal. I wasn't, And Al and wound up taking the beer over to Jimmy Weisbecker's, and the party moved over there, and I stayed at my house and was mad at my
you
dad.
were without the party.
I wasn't even allowed to go to the party.
Okay. So when you and Al married, it was after college, it was after Sloan Kettering, and you'd moved back to Long Island?
So I was working at North Shore University
North
Hospital
Shore in ICU.
In ICU when we
you got
married.
Now, you mentioned before there was a very big trauma in the family. When did this happen?
So I was, we got engaged in March of '84, and Mom passed away in April of '84. She passed away on our negative first wedding anniversary of a heart attack. So we had set our date for 1985, and I thought, we were all set. And the head nurse that I worked with, we went out to lunch together at Sloan Kettering. We got off the unit together, had a nice lunch to celebrate that, it was a year out to the wedding. And when we got back to the unit, there was a phone call that, Kathy has to go downstairs. The family's coming to pick her up. Something's going on. And we didn't really know all of what it was. So Mom had a heart attack.
This was out of nowhere, just came out of nowhere, blindsided,
right?
Right?
She had, I won't say that my mom had the most robust health. She had a stroke young. She'd had polio as a child. She spent 2 years in the hospital. But she had recovered from that. She had no, we were not aware of any long-term effects from that. But, she had Bell's palsy. She'd had a few things in her adult life. So I can't say she was, super strong.
But anyway,
but nobody saw this coming.
Yeah.
She was 50, and she was, my father was leaving for work that morning. She was talking to him, and then she went back to sleep because he left early, and she had a heart attack and was gone.
That must have threw a dim light on the wedding.
Ironically, it kind of gave us a good story because I did not want this date anymore. I didn't like this date. This had a very negative connotation for me. And we tried to change the date. Now, having both worked weddings for years, we knew exactly the band we wanted. We knew the photographer we wanted because we had both worked with them in the two places we worked. And so we changed to a date in September, but we couldn't get the
catering hall?
We could get the catering hall. We couldn't get the band and the photographer we wanted. And I was going a little crazy about it. And my father sat me down and he said, "Kath, it really doesn't matter the date." He said, "If it's Tuesday in June, it doesn't matter. Your mom wants you to have the wedding that you wanted to have, and we're going to miss her no matter when.
Whatever date.
So don't let the date make the decision."
Okay.
And so we went back to the original April 27th date and had a 68-degree, sunny, beautiful day. And the date I had chosen in September was Hurricane Gloria.
Divine intervention.
I just said, "Thanks, Ma."
Yeah, for sure. All right. Let's get past that now. So you're married. You now take a position at Stony Brook?
We were married and then bought the townhouse.
Townhouse.
And I started working in the neonatal ICU at Stony Brook.
Tell us what it's like being a neonatal nurse. And how long were you doing that, by the way?
About 5 years I did that.
Yeah, that's a long time.
Yeah.
So was that rewarding?
I loved it. I would have stayed in neonatal ICU. The problem is no nurse ever leaves it. And so I was going to be on nights for a long time. And after 5 years of doing nights, I was toast.
Is it challenging though? Even though it's rewarding, is it highly challenging to?
Yeah, it's such a complex field because every patient is so different. One patient is a 10-pound full-term sick newborn, and another one is 1.5 pounds. It's different worlds. Their
Well, that's why
problems are different.
it's challenging because the children that you're managing, they're not born in good health.
Right.
Everyone has something, some reason that you're here.
They are not probably having the experience they thought they were going to have there. I found it I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I not always easy, but it became harder for me after I had a baby because suddenly I think I understood at a different level what was happening to these families that I was working with, and it probably made me better at it. I didn't run away from it, but it got harder
Emotionally.
to deal with the loss and the suffering.
So you did that for 5 years working the night shift? And is your first child, Christopher, did he come at the 5-year point? Or?
No, he came while I was working neonatal ICU. I started working full-time, had Chris, and went back part-time.
Okay. So after neonatal, what was your next career move?
One of the nurses I had worked with at North Shore in the ICU, he was an IV nurse at the hospital, going around putting IVs in, started a home infusion company. And that was pretty revolutionary in the early 90s. No, that was something kind of unheard of, that patients could be at home and have intravenous antibiotics, chemotherapy, pain management, these kinds of therapies. Had not really been done at home before. And he had started this company, and I heard he was doing pretty well. And I saw an ad in Newsday for infusion nurses for Ed's company. And so I went in to talk to him about it. And my neonatal and pediatric background was really appealing because I could do IVs on kids.
Okay.
And I also could deal emotionally with kids who might have cancer, might need cystic fibrosis. A lot of patients with cystic fibrosis needed home infusion. And so I wound up going over there, and he was offering 3 12-hour shifts which were day shifts. And that worked well with Al's restaurant schedule.
Right.
Very little childcare needed, maybe 1 day a week. And
Right.
so, and the pay was much better. And suddenly we could move to Setauket.
Oh, all right. So to be clear, in this IV situation, you weren't in a hospital or an office where people were coming to you.
No.
You were in a car going to people in their home who couldn't come out, right? So, and how long did you do that?
Years. Yeah, I mean, honestly, at least 10. I did home infusion until 2010. I went full-time into IT at North Shore.
Okay. So to be clear, there isn't much area of Queens, Nassau, or Suffolk that you don't know driving.
I can tell you, there's a Dunkin' Donuts on the corner, make a right. Then you're going to see a basketball hoop, make a left. Yeah, I know which neighborhood is, named after cars, which neighborhood is named after trees.
Were you also maybe in some neighborhoods that were challenging,
Sure.
a difficult place to be?
Yeah.
Unsafe?
Yeah. We're good about providing security with you if you needed an escort. I had one patient who I went to see early in the day. It was like 10 o'clock in the morning, and she was in the projects, and it was not a good area in the Rockaways. And I went upstairs, and when I was, she said to me, when I told her I would be there at 10 a.m. or whatever, she said, call me when you get here. My son will come down and meet you.
Okay.
So her son came down. Her son was actually somebody I would have been very scared to run into in the hallway.
Okay.
But he brought me upstairs to his mom, and we did the whole visit. And, I was going to be her primary nurse. I'd be coming back once or twice a week to see her. And so he said to me, I'll bring you down and I will make sure you're okay. And he walked me up to a crowd that had gathered now by noon or 1 o'clock. And he said to the young guys that were assembled there, do you see her? This is my mother's nurse. Everybody make sure she's okay.
Yeah.
I would have gone to that place at 2 a.m. I'd have gone there. And they knew I was there to help somebody's mom, and that was all they needed to know.
That's cool. You mentioned as a neonatal nurse, that after you had your child, Christopher, you had matured, you got something out of that, you had a different vision, some epiphany of some sort. In all the time that you did infusion, what's the takeaway? What did you learn from going in and out of people's homes and doing this besides technical? What emotionally did you get from that experience?
Nursing in general is a gift. Like at 21, I was working at Sloan Kettering with patients who were younger than I was. They were adults. It wasn't a pediatric unit, but they were 19, 20 years old, and they were not going to see another birthday. And that I wasn't quite ready for that at 21 to understand that we were planning weddings and baby showers and things.
A future.
And, the nurses who were working the unit and seeing that that's a blessing. Like, going in home care, understanding that I don't live in a mansion, but I live very comfortably. I have everything I need. When there were sometimes you go into, there's an emerging concept in healthcare of social determinants of health, that you can have the best genetics, you can have the best health per se, but if you are homeless, you have food insecurity, you live with domestic violence or gun violence, like your health is in danger from these things. And the recognition that we'd worked hard for what we had, but we had everything we needed is eye-opening.
You know, besides your upbringing in your household, besides your spirituality, and besides some of these terrible life experiences you had to have young, you've always been someone who is adaptable with any group of people, anywhere, any way. And you've always been somebody that's accepted wherever you are for being fabulous and not reaching for the next thing. And, you know, you got this negative part. That's not who you are. You've always been thankful for whatever's been put in front of you. And I can't help but wonder if some of these experiences along the way help build that and reinforce
100%,
it.
100%. When you see people, people talk about like money, like money's such a great thing. Money's cool. Like, all right, I'll take more money, sure. But what money gives you is options. And when you are unhappy, or options are a good thing to have. So money can be powerful, but it's such a cliche. You can't buy your health. It is so true. If I tell you like, hey, here comes 62 knocking on my door, next month, what a gift. I don't look at like, I'm not down on my age at all. I shouted from the rooftops.
You're knocking on 62?
I will turn 62 next month.
I'm going to turn 61.
It's crazy.
I just wanted to say it on camera. I just want to make sure everybody understands I'm the youngest in the group. Actually,
Louise is the youngest in the group.
She's a full year behind us, right?
But a birthday is a gift. Like getting old, the aches and pains. Yeah, I get. Parts of it are not as.
There was some perks for you being in other people's homes doing infusions, right? You learned a lot of culture from a lot of people, and cooking. Did people feed you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh man, Josephine made me all the Caribbean food. Yeah, I my patients have taken very good care of me.
I brought that up because to this day, I know you Jones it. When you're in the hospital and you smell it, you go for it, right? Somebody brings in something. It's unusual. You love that.
And working in nursing in the New York metropolitan area, it's a very multicultural workforce. So when we would have, our Christmas party or, the Mother's Day luncheon on the Friday of Mother's Day weekend, everybody's bringing in, you're getting like real Jamaican beef patties. You're getting West Indian goat curry. And we're like, I'm all in,
So when you left the infusion, why did you make that change to go to Northwell? And were you at Northwell more than once?
I was at North Shore University Hospital, and when I did home infusion, some of my time was at Long Island Jewish. After I left, they formed North Shore LIJ, which is now Northwell Health. But I was working for St. Vincent's in home infusion. I was the director of their home infusion program.
Right.
And the nurses were going, that were doing the home visits, my employees were going to laptops from paper notes.
Okay.
And I was on the committee to do that implementation because there's a lot of decision-making and workflows that need to be decided. And about 6 months into the project, my manager said that they wanted to hire a nurse informaticist, which was kind of a new term. This idea of a nurse working in IT, they were going to hire somebody to do that role because it was becoming enough of a job that the directors of the different programs were being pulled away from their real
work. I feel like
work.
we're missing something in between here. There was a point where you went to run a company, wasn't there? Is this coming?
That's
or
coming.
Am I out of order?
Yeah, that comes.
Because I didn't realize that
comes
you
a
had
little bit later.
an exposure to informatics earlier on.
So I was at St. Vincent's doing the informatics stuff and was the director of their home infusion division. And I said to the COO when they mentioned that they were going to hire a nurse informaticist, I said, can you hire a director of infusion? Because I think I want to do this instead. And she was gracious. She said, if you help me find a good director, and we interviewed together and we found somebody to take my job, and I took on the informatics position. And that soon after St. Vincent's was closing in bankruptcy. And I went over to Northwell at that point. It was not yet Northwell. It was still North Shore LAJ. Because they were implementing a new electronic medical record for about 7,000 doctors. And I was there for about a year or two before I left to go do home infusion again for a little while. And that was a company in Farmingdale.
Right, but when you left this time for home infusion, you weren't the infusion nurse in the car. Now you took over a position of?
Chief Operating Officer.
Look at you. Big shot.
Yeah. Well.
Big shot. So I want to go, before we go further into that, your son Christopher grows up. He's a very interesting young man who's always had an interest in astrology, rockets and stuff. And when he was a kid, he had a summer camp, and we would go and they would build rockets and shoot them off. And
every summer.
And so he goes to school. He goes to college for
engineering.
And he goes to what school?
Binghamton.
Your alma mater. Yeah. So he goes to engineering, which is a 5-year program, right? After year 4, he comes home and he says something. He sits you and Dad down. What does he tell you?
He came home at Thanksgiving and said he wanted to do ROTC. He eased us in a little bit.
Okay.
But that didn't feel easy at the time. That rattled my cage a lot because, I mean, this was, the Afghanistan, all of this was going on at this point. This is, 2008, 9.
Right.
It was, we were in war. And so, but my dad had gone to West Point. I had a deep respect for the military and all of that.
Right.
I didn't really want it for my baby.
Right.
But he wound up then leaving school. He decided he wanted not to stay in and graduate. He wanted to leave and enlist and go in as a private first class.
And he was this close to completing his program.
Yeah.
Okay, so he comes home and he decides he's going to leave school and now enlist as
private first class.
Private first class, not even as an officer.
Yeah.
And how did that go?
What I tell parents, I had somebody who I work with who said to me, "You have to tell him he can't do that. It'll kill you." And I thought, gosh, I would never say that to Chris if this is really like what he wants to do and who he wants to be. It turns out it was a very proud time as a parent.
Sure.
He was in it 100%.
Yeah.
He fought hard to get into the Army. They certainly wanted him. He scored well on all the exams and everything, but he had a history of kidney stones, and that turned into a lot of pushback on his medical clearance.
Okay.
And he finally found a recruiter who would work with him and persist. And it was a good experience.
One thing I recall as a friend is that you kind of embraced the experience. Instead of being frightful of the whole thing, you just wrapped your arms around it, embraced it, reached out to the support communities that were out there. You made lots of friends with other parents and Facebook groups.
I still have friends that through, and he was only in 3 years. I still am in touch yesterday with people that I met through that.
And he was in the infantry, and he became very good with...
He's an expert marksman. I learned from my dad that there is a lot of marksmanship in our family. Some Olympic medals from up in Canada. So
side story. Before this all happened in high school, Chris used to have a little airsoft
pellet gun.
A little pellet gun. He had a big yard. He could go out there.
Airsoft. Yeah. What is it? The little plastic.
Yeah.
BBs.
And go out in the yard, safe place, and shoot it off. But you have a little thing where you like to collect certain things for Christmas. What are those?
Nutcrackers.
And how many did you think you had at that point in time?
30, 40 nutcrackers of.
And why would I bring this up in relation to Chris and his guns?
Because he took one of my nutcrackers out in the yard.
Was he looking like a soldier?
It wasn't one of my good ones, thankfully.
Right. Okay. And he put him out in the yard, and that was target practice, right? So that probably could have been some kind of a
we might have had a clue. Al said it looking back, going through his artwork from first grade and second grade. He was drawing Army helicopters. And Al's like, the signs were there, Kathy. We just really ignored them.
Sure. And much to Christopher's chagrin, he was too intelligent and they wouldn't put him into action, right?
He when one of the drill sergeants, I think it was, said something to him like, when he began to understand Chris's story was a little different maybe than some of the 18-year-olds he was working with at the time. And so he asked Chris a couple of questions and, because Chris could have chosen computer science as a specialty in the military or other things, but he wanted infantry. He wanted to be a foot soldier, a grunt, and the girl just shook his head and said, "Pretty dumb for a smart guy."
Yeah, yeah, and my vision is the Forrest Gump scene where he's tearing apart the guns and rebuilding it in like that's
he could do it with his eyes closed in the dark. Yeah.
So they would. But what did the officers use him? How did they? What jobs did they give him?
They sent him to California. There's in the Mojave Desert, Fort Irwin is the National Training Center, where they basically have created an artificial reality of you're in Afghanistan. They have built Afghani villages, and at the time, at least, I don't know what goes on today, they would bring troops who were being deployed in for a month of training and simulate interacting with the locals, injured people, civilians or soldiers. They had people from Hollywood coming in, makeup artists doing the injuries, and they would run through drills to practice.
And they were getting live tactical updates. So the troops that were getting trained here to be deployed were getting the latest information about what was happening on the battlefield. So ultimately, Christopher was dressed up as the Taliban in costume.
A lot of times,
cops and robbers with these guys' guns, So that's the funny story there. All right. Going back to your career, you ran this company for a little while. All along the way, you still have. Do you have connections to people from when you were pediatric, when you were doing neonatal?
Yeah.
Did you stay friendly with some families?
Yeah, yep, still connected with them. And I have two patients that I continue to see that you know them too because they're friends at this point. But one of them this week turned 33. I've been seeing him since he's 1.
Yeah.
And the other I've been seeing since he's 7, and he now works at Northwell, and sometimes our names are on the same emails. That's amazing. It's wild.
The reason I brought it up is because you have a job. You don't need this, and you don't do it for money, and it takes a lot of time, quite frankly, right? You have to sit 4 hours, I think, at a time, probably.
It's a social call.
But families that you're part of the family now, and you go and you have dinner, you sit and all that. So that's kind of cool. And you and your immediate family and your husband's family, you have this thing where the people that are around you, the circle that's around you is always around you, has always been around you, will always be around you. You don't really lose track of people who are important in your life,
It's something I am really beginning to appreciate at this age in my life, recognizing that, we went over the weekend to a memorial mass at our high school. We lost a couple of classmates this year. And talking with people who we talk to routinely, but realizing that in your 60s, Al was in first grade with these people.
Right.
And when you see each other, it's just a hug and pick up where you left off. It's not. It's quite remarkable. Listen, whatever you think of Facebook, it certainly has helped me stay connected with people who, even if it's peripherally, I have cousins that live in different states and in different countries, and to see their children, to experience things with them, to know that somebody got their driver's license or what college they chose in real time it's really,
it's exciting.
Yeah.
But to your credit, when you meet somebody and you click with them, you become very close and friendly with them, and it stays that way forever. I've introduced you to family members I have that you stay very closely connected to. I mean, I just know the way you operate.
If once you're in, you can't get out. We're the mafia.
Not a bad thing. Not a bad thing. So you have a hobby that we didn't even talk about, but you like to cook.
I do like to cook.
And you're quite good at it.
Thank you.
And your husband likes to play the game where he puts a challenge out there to you and several friends to see who'll cook his favorite dishes.
We'll have a throwdown.
Yeah, we'll have a throwdown a couple times a year. One of your particular skills, I'm a restaurant guy, Al's a restaurant guy. One of your particular skills is your prepping skills are amazing.
Thank you.
You love to sit with a knife and chop the dice, which most of us hate to do.
Mincing, dicing, I love all that.
The reason I brought it up is because of all the things that you are, with all these jobs, you don't work a 30, 40-hour work week, you have second jobs, sometimes a third job, you still find a way to cook. You've been known to be cooking at midnight just for fun. Yeah, so just want to bring that up. Yeah. All right, so let's go back to the career. You're running a company as a COO for a little while. You ran that out for a few years?
No, just over a year. It really wasn't a long time.
Yeah.
But I really missed my informatics work.
Yeah. So what's the next step then? You left there and when?
I reached back out to Northwell that I had left.
Now it's Northwell.
And it was still North Shore LIJ,
Was
but
when you
it was
first got
on the
there.
cusp of
Yeah, okay,
becoming
right.
Northwell. And they said to me, "Oh, you know, I reached out to a VP that I had known in my earlier work there, and she said, "Oh, you know, we'd be glad to have you back. Let me send you. I'll get a printout from HR of the open positions and tell me which positions you'd like to talk to someone about." And one of them was in population health informatics, which was a new field. This is 10 years ago now. And population health is focused on improving the patient experience, improving the health outcomes of patients, controlling the costs of care, improving the doctor's experience. So making sure that people get their screenings done, making it easy, seamless for them, closing those gaps in care, routine colonoscopy, mammography, reducing avoidable readmissions to the hospital. So using data to understand how can we identify these patients early in the process to get them the referrals they need to check, did they fill their prescriptions? Do they have follow-up appointments? Do they have a cardiologist if they need a cardiologist? All that.
Well, because
kind
at
of
this point in time, we're growing as a society into a digital world, and the medical business industry is still kind of laying back in
we're
the
a little
paper
behind.
world, a little behind. And so you're
Banking
now-
and retail.
You're now
we're
getting in the
learning.
on the cutting edge of what's to be in the near future, really in the planning and how that looks, right?
10 years ago, that it was really emerging. It has grown exponentially since.
So when you first started doing this job, what were you physically doing? What were you doing?
Honestly, working with divisions at Northwell that were piloting programs with Medicare and other insurance companies to say, how can we identify these patients if we give them a nurse who's assigned to them? I say it's like they give you a daughter who's a nurse.
Yeah.
These programs where you have somebody whose cell phone you have. I'm not that nurse. I'm the IT behind that nurse. I'm making sure that the programs they have on their phone or their laptop can support what they're trying to do. Identify the patients who qualify for the care, get them in front of the nurses, help them document medications and get that information back to the doctor. So building that infrastructure so the communication is a little more robust, less siloed.
That's cool. So at some point, you are not busy enough. You have a full-time job. You're a mom and a wife. You have a second job doing infusions on a couple of patients. You love to cook. You decide, what the hell? I'm going to go back to school.
Yeah, somewhere in there, I'd done a master's in business. I did an MBA program earlier on when I was still at St. Vincent's. Because St. Vincent's was struggling with financially, I wanted to try to understand business. An MBA was an unusual master's for a nurse to pursue at the time. But I kept saying, but what's happening here? Like, this feels so broken. What's business supposed to look like? And so I went for an MBA program. And that kind of, rather than narrowing my focus, it opened my horizons in terms of my work.
Now that you say it, that's what set you up for the
COO. Yeah, that's what made that a natural fit. And it was also, the company was owned by a nurse that I'd worked with back at North Shore in the ICU years before. And she knew I'd been in the infusion industry all those years. She had her own infusion company at that point. In 2015, I looked around and said, I had said to myself, I was in nursing school and I thought, I think I might do a PhD someday.
Sure.
It was always in the back of my head. But I was at a point in my life where the stars had kind of aligned for it. You know, Chris didn't need my care anymore.
Right.
I didn't know all that was going to happen with Peggy and Dad. Peggy, my stepmother, Dad remarried. But Peggy got sick soon after I had started the program. But I decided to go back for a PhD.
Okay. And what were you studying?
Biomedical informatics.
Right, which is new.
Yeah, it's
fairly new program.
So these programs have they've been around, but the ways that they're being used now by nurses and doctors are different. The data scientists have done this stuff for a while, but for a nurse to go into this kind of thing, it was an interesting cohort of students. We had pharmacists, nurses, computer scientists, doctors,
Right.
a little bit of everybody in there trying to figure out. We have so much more information at our fingertips in healthcare now than we've ever had before. And with the Internet of Things, the potential to gather data on our patients, not in the creepy way, but like, my watch knows how many steps I've taken today. If we can gather some of this and use it to predict health, illness, it's going to be wild. So doctors and nurses are kind of excited about this technology.
Your dissertation or your thesis? What would that have been then?
So Northwell had launched a pilot program using chatbots. They call it conversational artificial intelligence. Our use of it, I think, would be a stretch to say it was artificial intelligence. Okay. It was more of an algorithm of, if the patient says yes to this question, ask this question. If they say no, ask this other question. So it wasn't
in the computer as opposed to on a chart that you're filling out.
Yeah. So the patient leaving the hospital the next morning would get, it looks like a text, but it is web-based and secure, and it's not texting, and it's linked to their medical record. They'd click on this link and answer a few questions about my shortness of breath is worse, better, the same. I filled my prescriptions. I didn't fill my prescriptions. If they filled prescriptions, you might move then on to their follow-up visit. But if they didn't fill prescriptions, you'd ask other questions about, let's talk about that. Is it, and give them options. I can't afford it. I don't like the side effects. I don't think I need it.
Right.
Whatever that, I can't get it from CVS, whatever that might be. And those answers are all scored green, yellow, and red, depending on the level of alarm associated with the reply. And red replies would get a call back in minutes.
But this is what you wrote and spoke about to earn your degree?
So, this is a vendor company that Northwell worked with, built this chatbot application. Yep. Northwell implemented it for these high-risk discharged patients to monitor them in the community. And my dissertation was on, how did it go? And they did have reduced readmissions for patients who participated with this model. And now Northwell has dozens of use cases for this
we were all
chatbot.
very fortunate to be able to watch via computer you do your presentation, and we were all very excited when you earned your doctorate, and congratulations on that.
Thank you.
But after that, what I find even more interesting is Northwell kind of embraced this piece that you now were a professor in, you were a student, and you could bring something to the table for a company that's very progressive and growing and wants to be on the cutting edge, right? They embraced it.
It was, the timing was really fortuitous for me, because I finished at the end of 2019, just in time to make some gingerbread. And then, and along came 2020. And what happened in New York in early 2020? COVID.
Right.
And the ability to communicate with patients without having them in our offices, without having them in our hospitals, became really critical. Right. And so the use of this kind of technology to check in on patients who had COVID and were home, who might normally have been admitted to the hospital, but we just didn't have the capacity. They might have been sent home with a pulse oximeter, a thermometer, and a chat each day to say, what was your temperature this morning? What's your pulse oximeter reading? And we could bring them back to the hospital if they needed it, but they could be kept at home rather than in the hallway in a hospital.
So did your position change at Northwell?
I'm still on the same team.
Right. So the team that you're on, if I remember correctly, and I might be simplifying this way too much, but to make it easy for everybody to understand, a bunch of IT people really putting together the technology piece, but you become the expert advisor in the room who not only understands the technology, but understands the medical patient side of how this really needs to integrate.
That's what a clinical informaticist brings to the table. Yeah. And I work with a team of doctors and nurses. It's not just me. Okay. But very bright IT people at the table who can help us build the solutions. But the doctors and nurses and respiratory therapists understand the problems we're trying to solve. Right. And what would be a red answer? What would be a yellow answer? Right. That's what we bring to the discussion.
And besides being able to audit an individual's progress after they leave an office and when it might be time to bring them in, does it not also, this technology and what you've been working on, also lend the ability for one doctor to communicate with another, for a medical record to follow a human instead of having different paper in different locations?
So that's the electronic medical record model in general. That is the goal, where your cardiologist can see what your pulmonologist is doing, what medications they've changed.
Right.
Maybe they don't have to repeat lab work because they can see the results from the lab work you had last week when you got referred to them. The notes go back and forth. I had one instance of an internal medicine doctor who had resisted going to electronic medical records with good humor. He wasn't a difficult person at all. But 6 months later, in a conversation with him, he pointed out that day he'd had a patient who came in with chest pain, and he would normally have sent him to the emergency room. But he was able to do an EKG and consult with the cardiologist in real time, the cardiologist who's in another building, who has the same record and can see this EKG, and the cardiologist adjusted the medications, and the patient was able to go home.
Well, that's amazing, because anybody that's ever had any, chronic or bigger issue, sometimes there's a path. You got to go to this doctor first and be examined. They rule this out. The next doctor is going to rule something out. The next doctor, and it's kind of a process of elimination, which in my own personal experience with my wife, it could take as long as 10 years to get to the solution.
Yeah.
And now here you just jumped ahead in real time to solve that problem, which is amazing. People don't realize how far we've really come in a short period of time.
And it's the pace is breathtaking. I will tell you, I started the PhD program in 2015 and finished at the end of 2019. In my intro class, the professor said, the most painful thing I'm about to tell you about this program is that by the time you finish this PhD, everything I teach you in this class will no longer be applicable. And so I teach informatics now at Hofstra, and I tell my students, because they're coming up to take my job.
So let's just point out, she just said she's teaching informatics at Hofstra while she has a full-time job, while she still sees some infusion patients, right? But you also have another hobby for a long time now we didn't talk about.
Okay.
You mentioned it. You've been building gingerbread houses. How long?
More than 30 years. Chris was 3. One thing my dad had done when we were growing up, if you wanted to help on a project, he brought you in. I learned how to spackle. I learned how to hang wallpaper.
Yeah.
I wasn't afraid of projects like that. And so I looked at this as construction. It was it's pretty basic. It's tile work. It's a little glue, a little...
What about that is the hook for you? Is it an artistic thing? Is it a mental break? Is it a social thing? What is the hook for you?
Honestly, I enjoy the process. It becomes really kind of zen for me when I'm in the flow.
Right.
But the reason it has stuck over all these years, the thing I really love about doing these elaborate gingerbread houses, it doesn't matter who comes in your house. They could be 3 years old. They could be 90 years old. Everybody smiles at a gingerbread
we
house.
skipped over that part. So what evolves from here is you learning how to do gingerbread into you turning it into a reason for a party, which is gingerbread making. So other people come to your house and could build little gingerbread kits together. And this kind of grew into something that got a little big, right?
It started with someone I worked with had bought a kit, and she asked me for some guidance. She had a son who was 3 or 4 years old. He's in his 20s now. And I said, come over to my house after work on Friday and I'll build it with you.
Right.
I'll show you how to do it.
Right.
So a few other people overheard the conversation and they said, we'd like to do that too. And so, I don't know, I had maybe 6 people and a child each. And we built the houses, they decorated them, they took them home.
You said 6 people?
Well, this is
time,
early in the mix, Mike. And we did, I don't know, I might have had hot cider and we ordered a pizza. It wasn't anything crazy.
Right. Just a fun holiday
Just
thing.
a little, December Friday night party at my house. So the next year, somebody asked, when are we doing that party again? And I said, well, I taught you guys how to do it. Aren't you going to? They're like, no, we want to come to your house and do it.
Okay.
And so I think that might have been the year I said, hey, Michael and Louise, Al's here. Why don't you guys come over? And you made gingerbread martinis.
Oh, I forgot that.
Frangelico, I think was
okay.
And that party took a left turn and never went back. But what I expected to happen with that party was that the kids would outgrow it.
Yeah.
but it didn't matter. They got to be 12, 13, 14, 15.
It became a tradition.
And they wanted to come.
Right.
They wanted to come do this. And now there were more little kids come. And before COVID, I think we hit like 75 or 80 people in the house doing
insane.
this. It was insanity.
There was a point where your husband was begging you to
Al likes to say that party died of COVID.
75 people building gingerbread houses. And you tasked yourself with some prep in advance because you actually have to put the structure together before you decorate them.
Yeah.
So now there's a point in time while you have a full-time job, you're doing infusions, you're going to school, and you're building your own massive gingerbread house. Now you're setting up 50 to 75 gingerbread kits in advance. Are you insane?
Yeah, that might have been the tipping point.
On your own personal gingerbreads, each year you kind of seem to challenge yourself to dial it up a notch, right? So what were the progressions that you remember?
You know, at the cathedral that I did the first one,
Right.
I have made it again since, now that I know some tricks.
Yeah.
You know, I've learned how to make better shingles, how to make stained glass,
windows.
you know,
Right.
all those kinds of pieces that in the beginning you know, you're just baking some gingerbread. I think I made chocolate shingles, you know. Now I light the house from within. You know, lots of bits and pieces.
To explain to the audience, this requires Kathy buying some very highly specialized candy that are used for different things, like Necco wafers and you know, the peppermint spears that I like so much used for shrubs,
the
right?
green leaf.
So your houses have gotten on a platform maybe this wide. Some have been this tall. You've entered into contests.
Some local contests. I haven't done the national. I've gone to nationals, but I would have to get my house to Asheville, North Carolina. That's not practical. You know me, I'm practical.
Have you won?
I've
I know
placed.
you're modest, but how many you've won?
Placed. Well, I've done well in local competitions. There was somebody at the Port Jeff competition who built the Theater 3 from Port Jeff.
Right.
And he was an art teacher, and it was pretty amazing.
Okay.
So I don't embarrass myself.
So to be fair, my favorite part about this whole thing is after the fact, when we're sitting in your house and I can eat the old stale candy off it because we're decorating lawns. We have walkways with bricks going up to these houses. It's crazy. That's my favorite thing when you're not looking to peel pieces off.
The very first ones, people always ask, you know, what do you do with them? And when Chris was growing up, his birthday was January 1st, still is. And it was his birthday party that I said to you were eyeing the roof of that house. It was milk chocolate
chip
shingles.
By chip.
And I was like, well, Christmas is over. It's time, I guess. And that became a tradition then that at Chris's birthday party, the kids could tear into this thing.
But that tradition is gone now because what do you do with your gingerbreads now?
Cohen Children's Hospital, I've been bringing them to the lobby, the Christmas display in the lobby there.
Right. So again, because you're not bored enough, I just want to review for everybody. We have a full-time job. We're studying to get our doctorate. We are also doing infusions a couple times a month, which is very time-consuming. We are building gingerbreads, having gingerbread parties. We're cooking in the middle of the night sometimes. And you're a busy lady. You got a lot going on. Now, because you've moved so far forward in your career with technology, you're a doctor. You've seen a lot of different things. Now you're being asked to speak at conferences too, right? Yeah.
No, I'm getting some really amazing opportunities now. This is a really fun spot in my career. I was at a meeting yesterday with Meta, the virtual reality, putting headsets on and talking about how we could use that in healthcare. Meetings at Google, meetings.
You're being asked to speak because people want your inside view of what the future looks like and how it's working now.
You know,
right?
I'm really fortunate to work for such an innovative health system. Northwell is an early adopter. We are really encouraged to take a chance. Like start small. 20 patients. Doesn't have to be. You don't have to solve every problem. You can learn a lot from a pilot, and Northwell has that built into the culture. And some of the pilots have gone well. And what this chatbot thing being a perfect example, to me, like I was asked to present on that recently when I traveled with Brittany to Chicago. And in my mind, I'm like, oh, that's so 2018. Or do people really want to hear this from me? Are they going to be bored by this? And there were so many questions. And what I came to realize was Northwell adopted it early in 2018. By 2020, we were really rolling it out and using it broadly because we had to in a pandemic. And if we hadn't piloted it in 2018, we would not have launched it in 2020. We were too busy. There was not time to do that kind of something new. But because it was already there, we could grow it fast was fine. But building the infrastructure would have been unsafe. Other health systems who weren't doing it in 2018 and 19 are just starting to do it now because they're just recovering from the pandemic piece of all of this. And so where we would have been an early adopter, we are now years ahead on that kind of technology. And so I think that's why I'm getting the opportunities I'm getting, because this topic is of great interest. And we have a lot of insight now because we've been using it a long time for lots of use cases.
Your family and friends are proud of you for so many things.
Thank
on
you.
so many levels. But one of the things that's important for me to note here is that along the way, you come from very humble beginnings. We know that. And you're 60's a new 40. You're thriving and your life is great and your family and everyone around you is thriving. But one of the things that's important to say is that along the way, you've pulled people along with you for the ride. You're not just somebody going along. And that's probably one of the things you'll be remembered by most is the fact that you've taken people along for the ride. My own family is included in that.
We're going to make your daughter an informaticist.
Other families of my family that you know, you've plugged people in, you saw an opportunity, you knew somebody here who had that, you said, you guys should talk. And I mean, we could go on, but there's probably a lot more people than I'm aware of. Maybe a cleaning person along the way, got into her career, and has now gone from house cleaning into, having a medical profession. And it's just kind of...
The party that you interviewed the kids at, my father, my husband and his siblings at, there was a waitress there. She was wonderful.
That's right.
She was wonderful.
That's what I was thinking about.
And the end of the day, she saw a Northwell Post-it note in the kitchen, and she asked me, "Do you work at Northwell?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Oh, it's my dream to work for Northwell." And turns out she is a certified lab technician. She can do venipuncture and draw blood. I said, "Give me a resume." She sent me a resume, and she's working for Northwell.
That's amazing.
I'm thrilled because Northwell's lucky to get her. Right. That's the truth. Like Alex talks about my networking skills. He goes, I'm like, if you think of it as networking, it comes off as work. I said, I'm a connector. I want to know you. What are you excited about? Right. And let's get you in front of the people who can help you do that.
And I want to jump on that because people who are networkers, they don't know the networking. It's who they are. It's the natural way of behaving is being interested in other people, connecting the dots and saying, maybe
you should meet this other person.
For whatever reason, right. Yep. So we could talk all day. This is a long one. I want to kind of wrap it up in summary, but I had a point I was going to make, and it's escaping me at the moment. But, I think everyone around you is thankful for all of that. And this is why, I got it. When I started the show, I said, why am I talking to a friend? Because you have an interesting background, and you really do. I think the audience can see now, you've been in so many different areas. You're an expert in a lot of areas. You're, a lot of things to everybody, and it's very interesting. And when Charlie posts this, we'll have your social tag up here so that people, if they want to reach out to you and ask questions and say, how do I, where should I? You'll be a great resource to everybody who's out there. I'm
glad to. I love that part. I just had lunch today with somebody who I met online through a meeting, and we were like, we need to talk more. Yeah. And it's a new friendship formed.
Well, thank you for being my guest today, Kathy Mazza, Dr. Kathy Mazza. You'll find us on TikTok. We'll be on Instagram, Facebook. We'll be on Spotify for the show, and you can find the full length of this video on YouTube. Thank you so much.
Thank you.